So good evening, and tonight we're going to be giving a presentation on the hydroplate theory explanation for the origin of comets, asteroids, and what are called Trans-Neptunian Objects, or TNOs for short. Trans-Neptunian Objects are orbiting objects around the sun that spend at more than an average of their orbital time period outside of, therefore outside the orbit of Neptune, which is 30 times farther from the sun than we are. And so if something is out that far away, like Pluto, which was a planet, some people want to keep it a planet, but it was planetized and then deplanetized. It's actually a trans-Neptunian object. It spends most of its orbit outside of Neptune. And this is Trans-Neptunian Objects, and what I'm doing here is reenacting what I and others presented at Dallas headquarters for the Institute for Creation Research on December 8th of 22. And here it is, January 15th of 2023. And because we weren't recorded down in Dallas, I'm doing this so that people can know what was presented to the scientists of ICR back in December. And the reason why we were able to do so is because the new CEO of the Institute for Creation Research, ICR, is Dr. Randy Galusa. And he is a lover of Jesus. He's not a politician. He's not an empire builder. Very high integrity, and even though his organization in the past has maligned Dr. Brown and his work with the hydroplate theory, undermined it in different ways and stuff, when he came into the organization, he's actually communicated frustration at the way creationist organizations treat each other, and where people in other creation organizations other than ICR, or how ICR is treated by AIG, just frustrated with the overall animosity at times and censoring of ideas and maligning and defending walls, defending ideas, even though the truth might not be behind what they're defending. And so he started out our meeting on December 8th in the morning devotional time by saying, today we've invited these people here to present, to undo an injustice of the past of allowing the hydroplate theory to be presented. And he considered it an injustice, what's happened in the past. And the people that were there was Dr. Randy Galusa, and then on the hydroplate theory side, a board member of ICR, Rob Yardley. He's an advocate of the hydroplate theory. Mike Snavely of Mission Imperative, which we're going to watch one of his video animations here in this presentation, and we watched it there in Dallas. He was also physically present, Mike Snavely, an advocate of the hydroplate theory. Juanita was there as well. And then zooming in was a man, an engineer that used to work for Raytheon, rocket science engineer working for Raytheon at the time. Now he's working for a company in Montana. And his name is Brian Nickel, and he's spent hundreds and hundreds of hours animating the hydroplate theory in his YouTube channel. So you can go to Brian, B-R-Y-A-N, Nickel. Brian Nickel, you can go into YouTube and then just search on the YouTube search bar, Brian Nickel hydroplate theory, and then go to his YouTube channel, and there's like 12 or 13 different sessions there where he animates different aspects of the hydroplate theory, including where comets and asteroids and TNOs came from the hydroplate theory perspective, which they were jettisoned. The debris that became comets, asteroids, Trans-Neptunian objects, meaning they orbit outside the orbit of Neptune, 30 times farther from the sun than Earth. That's why we call them TNOs, Trans-Neptunian Objects. He's animated that, and we're going to watch that next week. So part 2 of this presentation is going to be his videos, and he was there and actually I started by saying, you know, I'm not, and this is the next slide here. I'll go to the next slide. I'm not an engineer, but I have engineering. I've gone to engineering classes and taking orbital physics and college-level engineering classes over at Olympic College. I was Navy nuclear trained. Was working in the nuclear engineering department of Puget Sound. Was an instructor at two nuclear engineers, and in charge of an engineering project of things for Puget Sound. And actually, what I emphasized there is, I don't have a degree like everybody here. Everybody I was talking to was a doctorate in a different field. But my bosses in the Navy and at the shipyard don't consider me a knuckle dragger, is the way I put it to them. And I said, and I've got Brian Nichol here and his mission, and Rob Brown. And Rob Brown is a professor of astronomy at the Air Force Academy. He's a tenured professor of aeronautics. He's an aeronautics professor at the Air Force Academy. And I said, these two guys are here. If I say anything that is not accurate, then they're supposed to chime in to correct anything that I'm saying. Because somebody, you don't want to have somebody talk about a subject that's pretty steeped in high-level engineering without knowing what they're doing. And I've taken courses, but I'm not a degreed engineer. So, and then all the ICR scientists were there, doctorates in their fields, different fields, were there at this presentation as well. Then I told them, we're basing this presentation on the hydroplate theory, which was developed by Dr. Walt Brown starting in 1980. There was some discoveries I don't have time to get into that they found on the ocean floor, and the light bulb went on in his mind, and he started saying, I think I know how the flood occurred just based on what Genesis 7 says. And then he was a West Point Army Ranger paratrooper, West Point graduate. He was the director of Bennett Laboratories, associate professor of U.S. Air Force Academy, so he went from the Army into becoming the first doctorate the Army ever allowed to go get a doctorate, and he got it at MIT, and he got it in a field of thermodynamics. He was dealing with transferring heat flow, the amount of heat flux associated with the sun through a barrier to water. His work went into helping the nuclear power industry. We were trained on what he had worked in his doctorate thesis. And he was chief of science and technology studies at the Air War College, and then the Air Force said, we want him. The Army had him. Air Force said they wanted him, turned him into an Air Force Academy professor, and he's a retired Air Force colonel, and he left at 20 years as a colonel to go further research what he thought he had discovered about how the flood of Noah occurred. And he's been working ever since then on this. So the resources are Center for Scientific Creation, which is being Creation Science Center is what it is now going to be, long story there. Brian Nichol's HPT animations are going to be used in this presentation next week. And Mike Snavely's Horrors of the Flood, we're going to be watching a 10-minute clip from his DVD presentation there. And so I'm going to go into his animation first, because some of the guys, I waited till later at ICR, and some of them said, we could have followed you a little bit better if this would have been right up front. So we're going to go ahead and watch this animation now.
How did the flood actually happen? What were the mechanisms that produced the flood? Over the years, there have been many scientists, Christians, and flood geologists who have tried to identify those mechanisms, and they've developed various theories in an attempt to explain the flood. They'll look at many natural geological features, such as these, around the world. and they'll attempt to explain them within the context of their theories. In our view, the most plausible explanation for this entire flood scenario has been proposed by Dr. Walter Brown. He calls it the hydroplate theory. Let's have Dr. Brown give us a brief overview of his theory.
We can see on our planet many very strange features that can now be linked together and systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an unimaginable amount of explosive energy. This explanation shows how major mountains formed very quickly. It explains our coal, oil, and methane deposits, rapid continental drift, why we find on the ocean floor huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent covered with lush vegetation. There were seas and rivers. The mountains were smaller than today, perhaps 5,000 feet high. According to the hydroplate theory, about half the water that is now in our oceans was originally contained in interconnected subterranean chambers. This water formed a thin spherical shell at least a mile thick, perhaps 60 miles below the surface of the pre-flood Earth. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water stretched the crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack which grew in both directions at about 2 miles a second. This crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 3 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 60 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of this rupture. All along the globe-encircling crack, fountains of water jetted supersonically into and far above the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day, and it describes these events about 5,000 years ago that we can now tie together scientifically in cause and effect order. Some of the water, jetting high above the stratosphere, froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the crack, producing huge volumes of sediments that settled out of this muddy water all over the Earth. These sediments trapped and quickly buried plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Vegetation, uprooted by the floodwaters, accumulated in certain regions where it was buried and compressed, rapidly becoming our coal, oil, and methane deposits by processes we can duplicate in the laboratory today. Eventually, the rupture became so wide that the newly exposed compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like a seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of well over 60 miles an hour, they ran into resistances and, like a crashing continental-sized train, compressed, crushed, and buckled. As the continents crushed and thickened, they rose out of the floodwaters. The portions of the hydroplates that buckled down formed ocean trenches. Those that buckled up formed mountains. This is why the major mountain chains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. This also explains why today's continents do not have a jigsaw fit against each other, as so many textbooks mistakenly claim. Instead, the continents would fit much better against the sides of the mid-Atlantic ridge from where the continental drift began. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters eventually drained. This movement and the resulting compression and buckling was so cataclysmic that it occurred within a single day. Immediately after the flood, sea level was considerably lower than it is today, so land bridges connected every continent. This allowed people and animals to spread and repopulate the post-flood Earth. As the thickened continents slowly sank into the Earth's mantle, the new and very deep ocean floors had to rise in compensation for the downward flow of mass. Therefore, sea level slowly rose for a few centuries after the flood and eventually reached today's level. As sea levels rose, river channels were drowned, channels that had been cut down to the lowered sea level by the heavy drainage after the flood. This explains the famous submarine canyons that are extensions of our rivers such as the Amazon, the Congo, the Indus, the Hudson, and the Ganges. Because some submarine canyons are almost 3 miles below today's sea level, we can conclude that sea level and some seafloors were about 3 miles lower than today. The rising sea eventually flooded the natural bridges and produced the look of the continents as we see them today, separated by water. As the floodwaters drained off the continents, every continental basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. Because of local conditions, some of these lakes simply dried up. Others continued to collect water from rainfall and drainage from higher elevations. Sometimes a large lake spilled over its rim at the lowest point, eroding a notch. If the rim wall was composed of sediments that were still soft, the escaping water quickly enlarged and deepened the notch. As the volume and speed of the rushing water increased, so did its eroding power, until the entire lake surged through a deep slit, forming a canyon. The largest canyon formed by this process is the Grand Canyon in Arizona. North and east of the Grand Canyon was a huge lake that I identified in 1987 and named Grand Lake. Grand Lake held twice the volume of water that is in Lake Michigan. Grand Lake spilled over its rim and carved this spectacular funnel 20 miles south of Page, Arizona, catastrophically forming the Grand Canyon within a few weeks and leaving a living testament to this terrible global flood, which can be studied in person today.
Wow, what a spectacular place! Well, what we've just looked at is a demonstration of the hydroplate theory. And while it is a theory, not a proven fact, the evidence for it is pretty persuasive. Let's take a few minutes and have a look at the theory in a little bit more detail. The theory is divided into 4 phases, so let me show you what they are.
You have to buy the DVD. So that's Mike Snavely. He was there, and I did leave out that Jim McDowell was also there, an advocate of the hydroplate theory, and is co-publishing the 9th edition of Dr. Brown's book, which is almost ready for publication and printing. The 8th edition is out of print. His book now is like $100, $150, $200 on, if you can find it online. The 9th edition has been delayed, unfortunately, but it's just about to be having the last glitches taken care of, and the 9th edition is going to be out. And Jim McDowell, who is now the head of the Creation Science Organization of Walt Brown's, is going to be co-publishing with Mike Snavely that video and book, that book. So, yeah, that was, I wanted to add to what he said, and think about this. If we believe in the flood, and we did talk about this at ICR, we have to come up with an explanation of how the entire world flooded to a depth of 22.5 feet, because that's what the Bible says. The Bible says that there was 15 cubits high above the ground when the flood reached its highest point, above the top of the mountain. The highest place on earth was greater than 22.5 feet covered with water. So first of all, you have to say, well, where did the water come from to flood the whole earth? And where did the water go? Well, the animation that you saw explains that, because before the flood, the mountains weren't as high as Mount Everest or Mount Hood or Mount Rainier or whatever. They crushed up and became high as a result of the compression event from when the continents were sliding and came to a crushing halt that lifted them up. So the mountains were lower, and then when the continents crushed and they moved away from each other, they opened up those huge ocean basins, and that's where the water was able to go. And then the water lifted in the ways that he said. Now, Mike Snavely, he did not want to, for his clients, for where he goes and teaches at homeschool conventions and other things, he did not want to get into comets, asteroids, and TNOs. So when he had the video made and had Walt narrate those notes, they didn't explain the energy. Walt said that the water jettisoned up the pressure of the crust pushing down on it. He knows, and Mike knows, and I know, there were other energies involved associated with supercritical water, and that has explosive energy that was leaving and what made it supercritical and all that stuff. And Mike Snavely didn't want his audience to get into that. And you don't want me to get into that. But I want to say that there was tremendous explosive energy in that water, and there has to be, and there was enough of that energy to cause the debris that was going up the crack to not just come back and some of it come down as global rainfall, but there was enough energy to accelerate the edges of the crust that were falling into that stream of water. There was enough energy to accelerate it to greater than 7 miles a second, which is enough to cause it to leave Earth's gravitational field and enter into orbits around the sun. So he didn't talk about that. And what I want to emphasize in this slide is that this is what it looked like. There was an ocean of water underneath the crust, and as the crack ruptured, then water is able to escape under 60 miles of crust, so there is a lot of pressure that's wanting to push that water out, plus it's supercritical high temperature, and that's greater than 705 degrees, and it has enough energy to jettison this up. And as I'm showing here on these plates, there was a little electric lightning bolt kind of things going on in the crust. We now speculate, theorize, based on lots of evidence, that there was piezoelectric effect currents going on. They know that during a major earthquake, there are massive currents and voltages in the crust. Our earthquakes today are nothing compared to what happened in the flood of Noah. And those electrical currents and voltages were creating a plasma condition that was generating nuclear processes that were adding incredible energy to the water. And that was the energy that was keeping the water hot enough to end up being supercritical and having the explosive energy going out. And as the crust was fluttering, it would have been banging down on the edges of the crack. It would have caused debris to break off from the bottom of the crust and have debris break off from the mantle, which is at the bottom underneath the water. And all that debris would have been just going up into the fountains and being jettisoned into space. Some of it jettisoned into space. The edges would have been less energy, and that would have been going up and coming down as rainfall globally. And this crack that went around the Earth is 46,000 miles. So from a physics standpoint, with the war of Ukraine and Russia, you see these artillery guns, really long guns. They put explosive powder and they can launch shells for several miles. You have to contain that explosive force to be able to get the projectile to go. Well, think about this. There's explosive energy of the water, and instead of a round barrel, it's a rectangular barrel. It's a barrel that at first is only 7 miles wide, with trillions of gallons being ejected, and it has a 60-mile-long barrel. And so when that energy comes up and it has 60 miles to accelerate and turn all the thermal energy into kinetic energy, thermal energy, energy of being hot, turned into kinetic energy, which is energy in motion. By the conservation of energy, it's going to make it go up. And so then the barrel, at first, is able to launch things in extreme velocities, hypersonic velocities. As the crack widens, the barrel gets bigger. It's like you wear out a gun barrel. And now there's not as much energy to send it up into space, so that's why the Bible says that it only rained 40 days, 40 nights. But the Bible says the water kept on getting higher until the 150th day. So for 110 days, after it's no longer globally raining 40 days and 40 nights, the water keeps going up because the barrel got too big to launch stuff up into space anymore, and now it's just leaking out from underneath the crust and continuing to rise. Everybody kind of follow that explanation, hopefully? So I wanted to show this is the fluttering crust, which is causing pulsating. As the crust comes down and goes back up, there would have been explosive pulses. So there would have been just an ejection of water and debris, and then a little bit less, and then ejection of water and debris. And so you'd have had a lot of water and debris being ejected at the exact same velocity in the same direction going up into space. And then next week, this is for next week, it kind of fit in the way I had it last session. This is a man holding up a slice, a 22-pound slice of a 925-pound meteorite that fell in the Gobi Desert. And what really baffles evolutionary scientists is how in the world did this form? Because those shiny little places, those are, when they found this, those little shiny places are olivine, which is a gem quality olivine that allows light to go through it. And it is a mineral that's extremely light compared to the iron nickel meteorite metal that is surrounding there, the dark places. So in other words, this is like finding ping pong balls, finding a big ice cube with ping pong balls evenly distributed in the ice. Like, how do you do that? And that baffles. The hydroplate theory explains it, but we're going to wait till next week to see Brian Nichols' explanation of how that occurs. So what are comets, asteroids, trans-Neptunian objects, which are objects that orbit outside of Neptune's orbit, 30 times farther away from the Earth than we are, from the sun than we are? And I call them TNOs. So throughout here, I'm going to just keep it short to be comets, asteroids, TNOs, TNOs. And comets, really, the difference between comets and asteroids is comets still have water in them. The asteroids would have all had water on them too, but they've lost their water over the time. See, everything that got ejected, every debris pile had water, because water is what sent it out. But asteroids lost their water. They didn't have as much mass. They weren't as ejected with as much energy to get out and live longer out in the outer parts of the solar system. And so comets still have their water, so when they get close to the sun, they volatilize the water and the gases, and they shoot off a tail of dust that we can see in the sky. Asteroids are just floating rock piles. They used to think they were floating rocks. They thought they were rocks, but they're rock piles, according to the hydroplate theory, and they're finding out that that's what they are. And trans-Neptunian objects look just like asteroids, except they're further out and in the orbit. And so, comet again, we see that the tail is always faced away from the sun because the solar wind blows the debris. So the comet gets close enough to the sun, the water volatilizes, shoots some of the remaining dust that's still, that dust and pulverized Earth's material that was sent up, sends it into space, and then the sun glistens off of those little microscopic pieces of dirt, and debris, not just microscopic, even bigger than that. And what's an asteroid? Small rocky objects that orbit the sun much smaller than planets. If you took every single one of these millions of asteroids that we know about and put them all together, it would be no bigger than a really small moon in the solar system. So there's a bunch of them, but they're scattered. And 1 to 2 million in the asteroid belt that are larger than 0.6 miles between Mars and Jupiter. So there's a whole bunch, all those white little dots there are between Mars and Jupiter. And then there's also tens of thousands in elliptical orbits around the sun that cross the orbital path of the planets, including ours. So a lot of them just hang out between Mars and Jupiter, just going around the sun. But there's also thousands, tens of thousands, that have their own orbits that are not in the asteroid belt. And they cross the orbits of the planets, including Earth's. And there's thousands more, and I want to show, I'm going to use my little cursor here. So right here, can you guys see that? See that cursor going around on the screen? And I'm pointing out these green asteroids that are called Trojans. See that? And then these are the Greeks. And these are the Hildas. And if this showed it, there's going to be some more out here this way from Jupiter. But those are called, these are asteroids that are locked into the Lagrange points of the Jupiter orbit. And I know that's confusing, and we're not going to get too much into it, except to say that a mathematician Lagrange, a French mathematician Lagrange, theorized that there were these gravity wells that are on each side of the orbit of the planets. So ahead of Jupiter's orbit and behind Jupiter's orbit on this equilateral triangle, there's a place that creates a gravity well. That if anything finds itself slowly coming into this gravity well, as if I had a plate, and a plate that just has a little dip in it, and I put a marble on the edge of the plate, and I put it on the plate edge, and it swings into this plate, and it wants to get out the other side, and it would get out the other side if there was any momentum coming in, it would just get to the other side and go out. But if I give it just barely let it drop in, then it's going to get in the plate, then it's going to start rolling around in the plate and stay in the plate. And that's what Lagrange points by gravitational physics. That's what's going to happen. And so the question then becomes, well, how did these asteroids get tens of thousands of them get locked into these Lagrange points of Jupiter? And the answer is they had to have extremely slowly been spinning out from the orbit of Mars, working their way further out, and they got into the Lagrange points of Jupiter, and they settled into those areas, very, very slowly coming in. No other theory can explain why there's Trojans and Greeks in the orbit. But the hydroplate theory gives a perfect explanation for how they ended up there. Now, going back to this, the James Webb Space Telescope orbits the sun near the Sun-Earth Lagrange point L2. So a couple years ago, they sent up the Webb telescope. I can't remember exactly when they put the Webb telescope up, but how many of you have been hearing news about the Webb telescope finding all kinds of incredible stuff? It only got into orbit last year, and it got to this L2, which is 1 million miles away from Earth. And the reason they wanted to put it there is because it's a Lagrange point. For two reasons, actually. One is it shields the satellite, the Webb telescope, from the sun. The Earth is now a shield. The Earth is between the Webb telescope and the sun, and it shields it. And the other reason is they don't have to waste having the power, fuel for the rockets on the Webb telescope to keep it in orbit, because it wants to stay in orbit. It wants to stay in the Lagrange point. It's caught there. And when it's in there, see that little circle at L2? It's actually rolling around in the plate. It's getting there and it's just rolling around in the plate. It's not going to leave that place because it's locked in gravitationally to the Earth, unless something hits it and knocks it out. Now, when they sent it there, nobody thought to ask, what if there's other stuff that's in L2? Because what is that other stuff going to be? If there's rocks and debris, meteor, little pieces of asteroids there, what's going to happen to your satellite when it gets there? It's going to get impacted. So instead of sending this place to this wonderful deserted island in space, they sent it to a driving range of a golf course. And one of the things they did not expect, and it's already happened, see that mirror down in the 5 o'clock position? There's a bunch of, all those little hexagonals are mirrors for the space telescope. See how on the left, that is how they launched it, how they originally set it up, but see that little white spot on the right-hand side at 5 o'clock? See that? That's a meteor hit. It's been hit by something, damaged this $10 billion space telescope already. And it hasn't, they had to rearrange all the mirrors to get rid of the error that put out to minimize that. It has been forever damaged and reduces its capability because of that. And they thought, how in the world could that? They did not expect this. What the hydroplate theory would have expected, you better go send a satellite out there first to go find out if there's any debris out there, because we would say that as stuff was spinning out into the asteroid belt, you're also going to get some of it getting caught into the L2 Lagrange point of Earth. And you might end up losing your $10 billion satellite. And time will tell how much debris is circulating there, but we would have anticipated, you better go check first. You go spend some money, send some kind of radar thing that can just check that whole Lagrange point and see if there's any debris there. So any theory on asteroids, comets, asteroids needs to explain how thousands of them are very delicately locked into these Jupiter Lagrange points. Only HPT does. Only HPT explains. And you get most of that next week when you see what Brian Nichols' animations teach. So what's a trans-Neptunian object? Any minor planet orbiting the sun at an average distance greater than Neptune's orbit. And as you can see, Pluto's orbit, which is elliptical and more elliptical, you can see that sometimes it's outside of Neptune's orbit, sometimes it's in. Pluto is a trans-Neptunian object. So how many TNOs? 70,000. They didn't even know about the Kuiper Belt until not many years ago. There are tens of thousands of these orbiting bodies in what's called the Kuiper Belt just outside Neptune's orbit. Only the hydroplate theory and again, Rob Brown, professor of astronautics at the Air Force Academy, wrote a paper, which we're going to get into here in a minute, published in the Astronomical Society of England, saying that all trans-Neptunian objects have an orbital feature that says that they used to be perturbed by Neptune's orbit, and that means that they spun out from inside the solar system. So and it got peer-reviewed. He didn't say how it got there. He's an advocate of the hydroplate theory. But he's just saying these orbital parameters can be explained by the fact that they were inside the orbit of Neptune at one time in the past. So what does a non-HPT? So there's lots of creationists, young Earth creationists, but they reject the hydroplate theory. They reject, therefore, that comets, asteroids, TNOs were ejected from the Earth at the time of the rupture and the flood. And so what do they say is the origin of comets, asteroids, and TNOs? And this is Dr. Jason Lisle, astrophysicist, in an email on the 20th of November. I suspect that both asteroids and comets are part of the original creation. There have been speculations that the asteroids came from an exploded planet. Now, why did they say that? Well, look at all this debris around between Mars and Jupiter. So there used to be a planet in there, and it exploded and gave that debris field that's there. There are so many problems with that, but That's what they think, because it must have exploded. But when I run their trajectories back in time, which is a useless endeavor, I don't even know why he would answer it this way, and neither did Rob Brown. Rob Brown said that is ridiculous. This is an argument that doesn't even deal with the question. They never converge within the biblical timeline. Likewise, each comet has its unique orbit, losing mass on each pass, which has nothing to do with the question. You can't take all that debris of the asteroids, and as an astrophysicist, he should know better than to think that a planet explodes and it sends all that debris, and so he thinks he can take the orbit of all the asteroids, run them backwards, and if that's true, it'll converge into the planet that blew up at some time. And that's ridiculous, because as that debris is circling the sun, in orbit around the sun, that debris is going to affect itself and it's going to throw the orbits off, and you can't spin the orbits of them backwards. And Professor Brown, Air Force Academy, thinks that explanation is bogus. Not even, but that's what he said. What young Earth creationists who believe TNOs were part of the creation say about organic molecules being found? Okay, Jason Lyle, how come they're finding glycine, a left-handed amino acid? How come they're finding 16 different complex organic molecules on Comet 67P? How come they're finding cellulose in space? How come they're finding all these other things in space that are attributed to things that are like organic here on Earth? And this is their answer. They are a result of spacecraft contamination prior to launch or after returning to Earth. NASA spent billions of dollars on these space probes just to contaminate everything. They contaminated it before it left Earth or after it came down, and they're in the lab and it's being contaminated. That's their answer. Does the Bible support the position that TNOs were part of the six-day creation? So now we're shifting subjects here. That's what they are. And young Earth creationists that don't believe in the hydroplate theory, they say they're part of creation. Does the Bible say that they're part of the creation? Does the Bible say any place God created the comets and the asteroids? No. Then God said, let there be light in the firmament of the heavens and divide the day from the night, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser night to rule the night. What are they? The sun and the moon. He made the stars also. Those are not comets, asteroids, TNOs, they're stars. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day, Genesis 1. Doesn't say anything, no mention of them, but that doesn't mean, that's an argument of omission, but we'll keep going here. If the answer is yes, they were part of creation, then the Chelyabinsk meteor was part of the six-day creation that blew up over Russia a few years ago, back in 2013. So in fact, next month it'll be 10 years. Is that right? Yep, next month. It'll be 10 years ago. How many remember this, when this happened in Russia? So if they're part of the creation, this is creation coming to Earth and blowing things up. It shattered thousands of windows. It busted down walls of buildings, the shock wave from that hitting the atmosphere at 40,000 miles an hour. 7,200 buildings were damaged in 6 cities, with the windows being blown out through most of those buildings. 1,500 people were injured, most of them by going to the windows and saying, what's that flash in the sky? And then the shock wave hit and blew glass into their eyes. A lot of people got severe damage from the glass exploding into their faces. They didn't see that 12,000-ton meteor coming at 40,000 miles an hour. And there's a fear that an extinction-level asteroid impact is going to come to Earth. We're hearing about it all the time. Guys, it's almost like you hear it monthly in the news that we're worried about this, we're worried, and so we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to go detect asteroids that could have our name on them, and then to figure out how to deflect them, blow them up, whatever else. And we're going to end our presentation with this recent DART project that we launched that just hit an asteroid back in September of 2022. And they got a bunch of data on that we'll be ending this discussion with that. Does the Bible support the position that TNOs were part of the six-day creation? Continued. Well, after the six-day creation, it says, then God saw everything that he made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6 days. So God said it was very good. There's 26,000 asteroids that pass near the Earth that we know of. And they keep on looking because of worried about an extinction level event. And so they're putting up these satellites, and they can find 26,000 that are passing near the Earth. Some have hit the Earth. We can see that in Arizona's meteor crater. How could asteroids, meteor impacts be very good? Because that's what Jesus said. God said when he's done, everything he created was good. They've hit the Earth in the past. It doesn't seem like it's very good that it's hit it in the past. And we saw what happened in Russia almost 10 years ago. That wasn't good. But what about the future? Does the Bible tell us anything about things in the future? And the answer is, I think, yes. It doesn't say asteroids, but it says the second angel sounded its trumpet, the trumpet judgments of Revelation, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. When that Chelyabinsk meteor hit into the atmosphere, what did it look like? A burning mountain. It looked like a burning debris coming in with a tail. And in fact, it just lit up the sky, and that's what people, whoa, what just happened outside? A third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So apparently, there's an asteroid that is going to hit this Earth in the future during the tribulation period on the second trumpet blast. It's going to hit into the sea somewhere. We don't know which sea, Mediterranean Sea, Indian Ocean Sea, whatever sea it is going to destroy the sea life and the ships that are in that sea when it hits. That's Revelation 8:8-9. Then the third, right after that, there's a third angel, and it blows, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. The third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. And I stopped and said to ICR at the time, I said, now really, in a way, this is an argument against asteroids being from the Earth. Because if the Earth jettisoned asteroids into space, then that means it's just crust of the Earth. I mean, it's crust and water from the Earth that went up. And so how in the world can something bring back to Earth something that's going to kill many people because of bitter waters? Because there shouldn't be any bitterness to this. And my response to that was, there could be something else involved here. For instance, what would happen? This one hits land. What happens if wherever it hits land, it destroys reactor plants? What would happen if this meteor were to hit into an area where there's operational reactor plants, and they either directly hits them? If you directly hit a reactor plant, do you realize that all of that fuel will be jettisoned up into the debris that will be flying up into the air, and it will come down, and where will it land? Into all the waters, the springs of the waters, everything, every place that people are getting water are going to have nuclear fuel in them, and they're going to drink it, and they're not going to know because you can't taste or smell radioactive debris. And you would die, and you would be finding out you're getting radiation poisoning from the stuff that you're drinking. And an ancient Russian word for wormwood, and I confirmed this with the Russian embassy in Seattle years and years ago, is Chernobyl. So when this is reading in Russian, wormwood, Chernobyl. And if an asteroid hit and wiped out reactor plants because it destroyed the electrical grid, Japan learns, and I know from my nuclear background, when you have a loss of all AC power, you lose all AC power at a reactor plant, they melt down. It's an unprotected accident. They will melt down, as the Japanese found out. And so if the grid goes down hard, all reactor plants that grid goes down, they're going to melt down. They're going to melt down, and they're going to go into the groundwater possibly, and the crustal breakups, and the other things that are going to happen as a result. And the people that die are going to go, it was a Chernobyl. That's a Chernobyl asteroid. because it caused radioactive debris in the earth. And so, could this be possibly close? Asteroid Apophis. How many people have heard of this one? They now know the asteroid Apophis is going to barely miss us on April 13th, 2029. It's on a very similar orbit to Earth as far as how long it takes it to go around the Earth, or how long it takes it to go around the sun. And so it keeps on passing through our orbital path every time it's orbiting, but it's usually we're not in the same spot. And in April 13, 2029, we're going to pass the intersection 20 minutes before it hits, before it goes through the same intersection. So it's missing us by that much. And in that 20 minutes, it's going to be less than 20,000 miles, and we have geocentric satellites at 22,000 miles. So this thing could take out some geocentric satellites as it's coming through. And there's some people, I just watched a video that Joel gave me, this is after ICR, that there's people, Tom Horn, who wrote a book on this and says that he has evidence and whistleblowers that are saying they actually know it's going to hit us, and they're lying to us, and they're censoring anybody that's knowing it's going to hit us because they don't want the Earth to panic. That's what he's saying. And I don't know that that's true. We're going to find out, or the world's going to find out, because everybody that's thinking about this is thinking we're going to be gone before that happens. In fact, they're even tying the tribulation period to this and saying, therefore, the rapture has to be soon, because if this is going to be part of the fulfillment of the second or third trumpet blast, and that's during the tribulation, then we're going to be gone before that happens. And, well, 2029 is not that far off. So, and then here's another one. And there will be, this is another verse that I think applies to asteroids coming upon the earth. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now, what's going to happen if an asteroid hits the ocean somewhere? It's going to be a major tsunami. Men's hearts failing them from fear and expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. Now, they might be lying to us about Apophis now, but as that thing gets closer and more amateur astronomers are going, oh, no. That sucker's going to hit us. And then the word gets out, and people are going to go, wow, if you live in this part of the world where we know it's going to hit, you're dead, just like they make movies off of. And what's that going to do? People's hearts failing them for fear of the things that are coming upon the earth. Tsunamis. How can this be good? French word for disaster, where we get disaster, is a combination of two words, des meaning bad and aster meaning star. That's a bad star. And now think about this, because when Noah and his family are coming out of the ark, when they look up in the sky, you know what they're seeing? Wow. They could have been seeing comets and all kinds of lights in the sky and everything, because all this debris is jettisoned and it's working its way out because of the water that's with it and because of the radiometer effect. It's working its way out into the Mars-Jupiter, between Mars and Jupiter, but while it's close, they would have been seeing all these things. And some of them are just barely getting up in, and they're coming down, they're crashing into the sun and disappearing, they're crashing into Mars and disappearing. And so at first, the sky would have been littered with them. And later on, we see the sky now that we hardly ever see them because of the orbits changing and some of these things being destroyed. Clearly, comets and asteroids are not very good, so could not have been part of the original creation. Is not part of the 6-day. So if not part of the 6-day creation, does the Bible give us a clue on the origin of TNOs? And we just saw Dr. Walt Brown's scientific explanation of the crack rupturing and the water jettisoning up, and I believe that that is where they came from, and the evidence supports that it's so. And this is what the Bible says: in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So what does that leave you with? Fountains of the great deep. What do you think that sounds like? Water. That's what a fountain is, right? Fountains of the great. The Bible is telling us there's an ocean underneath there, and there was a crack that caused the fountains to all rupture on one day, and that rupture caused global rainfall. The tragedy is the ICR scientists and AIG scientists and people, AIG pretty much uses the ICR scientists of the past that have developed this catastrophic plate tectonic theory, and they think that what broke up is the magma that came up from the earth and not water. And they can't explain where the water came from, they can't explain where the water went, they can't explain why there would have been a fountain generated by magma, because there's not going to be a fountain, etc. The guy who started Institute for Creation Research, and I shared this with them, is Henry Morris II, and he wrote in his book, The Genesis Record, this is what he wrote before Walt Brown even wrote his first book on the hydroplate theory. The Bible specifically attributes the flood to the bursting of the fountains of the great deep and the pouring down of torrential rains from heaven. These two phenomena are sufficient in themselves to explain the flood and all its effects without the necessity of resorting either to supernatural creative miracles or to providentially ordered extraterrestrial interferences of speculative nature. The breaking up, literally cleaving open, of the fountains of the great deep is mentioned first, and so evidently was the initial action which triggered the rest. These conduits somehow, this broken up crust, this conduit somehow all developed uncontrollable fractures in the same day. For such a remarkable worldwide phenomena, there must have been a worldwide cause. The most likely cause would seem to have been a rapid buildup and surge of intense pressure throughout the underground system, exactly what Dr. Brown said and what we saw. And this, in turn, would presumably require a rapid rise in temperature throughout the system, exactly what Dr. Brown says and exactly what the evidence shows. The water underneath the crust built up because the moon's effect on the crust would have been causing tidal pumping into that water, putting energy into the water, heating it up to supercritical temperatures. So this is a cannon here on the Earth, and this is a gravity well. And so when the rupture occurred, the cannon shot up some water debris with enough energy to send it up high into the atmosphere, but not enough to leave the Earth. And so that's your global rainfall. So on the side of the crack, the water and debris is going up, and the debris is becoming what? Our average mile-thick sedimentary layers all over the Earth. The debris got pulverized, and it settles down all over the world to become the sedimentary layers. But some of it went a little bit higher, but still not leaving the Earth's gravitational attraction. It falls down as super cold water, burying the frozen mammoths while they're standing up. And you can read Dr. Brown's chapter on the frozen mammoths. Some of it, more towards the center of the stream, left with greater than 7 miles a second, it leaves the Earth's gravity well, and it goes into orbits around the sun instead of the Earth. And so, as soon as you leave Earth's gravitational attraction, you're gonna go into orbit around the sun. And that's what comets and asteroids did. So this is the first paragraph of Dr. Brown's chapter on the origin of asteroids. And what it says in green, and I have what in green is his theory. And this really kind of struck a nerve with everybody. This is theory. The fountains of the great deep launched rocks and muddy water into space. That's theory. Everything in the rest of this white in his chapter, by the laws of physics, it's going to happen. If we today could shoot water, using any method we want to, shoot just water and debris out to where it just gets past Earth's gravitational attraction, what's going to happen to it? Just pulse it. It's going to be, the rest of this is going to happen. The rocks will move further from the Earth. Earth's gravity will become less significant to them, and the gravity of nearby rocks became increasingly significant. Consequently, many rocks assisted by their mutual gravity and surrounding clouds of water vapor that produced aerobraking, merged to become asteroids, isolated rocks in space, or meteoroids. So if you have just one chunk of something, it's a meteoroid in space. But if it's a compilation, it's an asteroid. Drag forces caused by water vapor and thrust forces produced by the radiometer effect concentrated most smaller asteroids in what is now the asteroid belt. And we'll talk about how it got pushed out into the asteroid belt next week. And I have a radiometer in my windowsill in the office, and it has no batteries. It just simply starts to rotate as soon as the sun hits it. And so it never rotates. Not this month because of all the cloud cover. But I'll show it to you next week. I can even take a flashlight. I can take a flashlight, and it's inside this partially evacuated globe of glass, and take a flashlight, and the photons of the light will push it around. So there's thrust to light, and the thrust would have pushed it out into the asteroid belt. Now, and I want to emphasize again that first sentence is Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, but as we saw, as we saw Henry Morris, the Genesis Record, San Diego, California, Creation Life Publications, 1976, on page 196. He was saying, just the Bible tells me exactly what this starts out with, what Dr. Brown's, and what started Henry Morris to say that? The Bible. So just the Bible is that first part of the first sentence. The rest of that will happen. The hydroplate theory is consistent 100% with the Bible. Every verse that talks about the flood in any way is consistent. I mean, that the hydroplate theory is consistent with every verse in the Bible that talks about the flood. It makes predictions that have come true. Prediction number 39 on the right-hand side. Asteroids are rock piles, often with internal ice acting as a weak glue. Large rocks that began the capture process are near the centers of asteroids and comets. That has been predicted, and guess what? When they ran the DART satellite probe that smacked into asteroid Dimorphos in September, the end of September last year, you know what they found out? It's a floating rock pile, and we'll see more about that. So, evidence that supports that TNOs came from the Earth. They have found DNA fragments, complex organic molecules, left-handed amino acids, rounded boulders. When you see rounded boulders anywhere, what do you think caused the rounded boulders? You put them in a rock tumbler. It's river rock. You see somebody that, they make they use it for siding of their house. You say, where did you get all the river rock? Because it's rounded. Many rock piles covered in dust and dirt, binary, contact binary, a whole list. All this is evidence that comets and asteroids came from the Earth. I need to pick up the pace here. But this evidence does not support what was expected by evolutionists when space probes were launched. They've launched space probes to go get close to asteroids, to look at them, to see what they are. And they come and they look at this guy, and this is Itokawa, and they realize that, see how it looks like a peanut? And on the right-hand side is a bigger part of the peanut, and the left-hand side is the smaller part. And then the space probe goes around it and measures and realizes the density of the right part is higher or lower, I can't remember which one, than the other one. There's a great difference in density, 1750 kilograms per cubic meter and 2850, pretty significant difference. And they know that they came together in space. So there was one asteroid and then this other asteroid, and they came together and became a contact binary asteroid. It freaks them out. They can't explain how this happens. Donald Yeomans, no friend of creationists, major evolutionary guy, member of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, admitted it's a major mystery how two objects each the size of skyscrapers could collide without blowing each other to smithereens. This is especially puzzling in a region of the solar system where gravitational forces would normally involve collision speeds of 2 kilometers per second, or 4,500 miles an hour. How did these two asteroids just come and just when everything else is just flying at thousands of miles of relative velocity? Well, because you pulsed out a bunch of debris, and this one has a big rock, and this one has a smaller rock, and so they start collecting their own debris through their gravitational attraction. But then they also have gravitational attraction between each other, and there's moisture that's surrounding it, and so the relative motion is being slowed down by the atmosphere of the moisture that's still there, and they just come in and they touch. Hydroplate theory explains it completely. But, and I've said before, if you're launched into space exactly parallel at the same velocity, and I'm here, Juanita, my wife, she's 20 feet over that way. By the laws of physics alone, just velocity, not thinking about gravity, we're never going to come to each other again. You can't swim over there, there's no atmosphere, you're in the vacuum of space. But as we get away from Earth's gravity, she has gravity, her mass has gravity, my mass has gravity, and over a period of time, our two masses are going to bring us together. So, by the laws of physics. Only HPT can explain this. Binary asteroids are an enigma. How could, I'm stunned and astonished at seeing a double asteroids with moons on them. Hale-Bopp they were shocked when the Hale-Bopp comet came in and it has a moon. How could this happen? All the same reasons I just explained. They can't figure out how come the Kuiper belt, Trans-Neptunian objects have their orbital parameters. They're just blown away. Rob Brown's astronautics professor, Air Force Economy, wrote a peer-reviewed monthly notes, Royal Astronomical Society, most prestigious astronomical society, place to publish, saying the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects are explained by having been inside the solar system before they got out to where they are today. And they go, you know what? Without him explaining how they were inside, he says if they spun out through the radiometer effect and they spun out and they started from inside the solar system, everything that we know about their orbits would be explainable. And they published it because it's math and physics. It's a fact. The evolutionists on ultra-wide binary TNOs, meaning TNOs that are 53,000 miles apart from each other, but they're linked. You can tell they've been linked in the past. And how can we even explain this? This observation is surprising, as it is difficult to imagine how to bind two small bodies that never come closer than 53,000 miles away, yet they're bound. And Brian Nichol will explain that. There's some more enigmas. Have we made enough of a point there? There's all kinds of orbital stuff that they can't explain. And then this is the real killer that the country spent millions and millions of dollars trying to find Planet X. This picture here shows extreme TNOs, meaning they're like 200, 300, 400, and Sedna is 500 AU away from the sun when it's the closest to the sun. And when they're the closest to the sun, this line is they're in the orbital plane of the solar system. And when they saw that, they said, how in the world can the perihelion, which means the closest time that they're to the sun, all be lined up at the ecliptic of the solar system? It's called the argument of the perihelion, to the point where another Brown, Mike Brown, leading discoverer of TNOs, remarked when he saw Sedna's orbit, there's nothing in the solar system today that can put Sedna in this orbit. It just blew our mind. There had to be something different about our solar system in the past. And then these other guys came, and Mike Brown actually, he did computer simulations. The only way this could have happened is there's a planet X out there, and we can't even see it, but it has its gravitational attraction has caused these things to line up in the orbital plane at their perihelion. And so for years and years, they were looking for Planet X. You know what Dr. Brown said as soon as they went on that look? He goes, give it up. It ain't there. Because what's explained by this, and what Dr. Brown of the Air Force Academy, Rob Brown, aeronautics explained, he goes, it's perfectly explained. The orbits are perfectly explained if they got a boost inside of our solar system. They got a gravitational boost that put them out. And they never found it. They can't find it. There is not a Planet X. And Dr. Brown of the Air Force Academy, Rob Brown, is right. They were inside the solar system and they got pushed out in a gravity boost while they were inside the solar system. TNOs' original creation origin is falsified. They weren't good. They aren't good. Evidence supports that TNOs came from the Earth. Evolutionist theories have a problem and only HPD doesn't. So everything that we see, their evolutionary theories is, oh, there's just no way this can happen, but HPT has no problem explaining why they're there. The following is an example of how evolutionists can explain something using D. McClellan's and my interactions with Dr. Brownlee at the University of Washington. And I explained this in my previous talk in February of last year, so I'm going to go quickly through this. But Dr. Brownlee, professor of astronomy at the University of Washington, principal investigator of the $212 million space probe mission to go out and prove the Big Bang. That's what this mission was supposed to do. Go prove the Big Bang. This comet's coming in. We're going to go get the comet tail dust, bring it to Earth, and prove our hypothesis. And it successfully flew out and flew through the comet tail of the Wild 2. It's spelled Wild 2, but it's a German, so it's Wild 2 comet in 2004. Brought it back to Earth. It landed with its capsule and, taking this stuff that it caught from the comet tail, landed here on Earth on January 15, 2006. Then they opened it up in a clean room at NASA headquarters in Houston. And what was he expecting? And this is actually 2009, so this is 3 years later. He says, Stardust, a mission with many scientific surprises. So 3 years after, he does his closing document that goes out to the world. Comets are ancient bodies of frozen ice and dust that form beyond the orbit of the most distant planet. They were expected to contain materials that the solar system formed from, preserved in ice for billions of years. But that's not what they found. When the international team of 200 scientists began examination of the returned particles, they found that the particles were indeed ancient building blocks of the solar system, but the nature and origin of the particles was quite unexpected. What we found was remarkable. Instead of rocky materials that formed around previous generations of stars, we found that most of the comet's rocky matter formed inside our solar system at extremely high temperatures. How do you get something that's in near absolute zero cold? How do you have materials inside the comet that were at thousands of degrees? That the only way it could have formed, these minerals can only form under extreme temperatures, sometimes in the presence of water, etc. When they were briefing everybody on what they found in the Wild 2 comet dust that was returned, it was very exciting to find pieces of chondrules, which we're going to get into next week, with olivine in the comet, and the scientific implications of this are profound. When we first presented the discovery, you could see jaws drop in the room crowded with 600 scientists. It was just phenomenal to discover something this profound, meaning we're in trouble. It's like, what do we do now? The finding that inner solar system materials formed at very high temperatures were transported all the way to the edge of the solar system to the region where Pluto is one of the major scientific findings of Stardust. Exactly. Only the heat wasn't inside the solar system close to the sun, which is what he was assuming. It was in the heat generated in the subterranean chamber, not just by the supercritical water temperatures, because that's not high enough. But when the crust was banging on that mantle floor, it would have generated thousands of degrees of heat and melted the rock and everything, because, just like when you pound a hammer onto an anvil, what do you feel the hammer, what do you see? What do you feel? Feel heat. And so there would have been extreme heat with the pounding of a 60-mile crust on the mantle, and then that stuff that then breaks away from the mantle floor and from the ceiling of the bottom of the crust and just gets jettisoned out into space. explains why it got the heat and then it ends up in space. Dee McClellan, who is a hydroplate theory advocate, she was in the clean room when they opened up the capsule with Dr. Brownlee. And Dr. Brownlee showed a new instrument that will be used to, this is her email to Dr. Brown just before they opened up the capsule. They got this new instrument. He stated, Dr. Brownlee of University of Washington stated that the particles from this comet dust would be pristine material from the formation of the solar system. He also stated that the ions would show that this dust would be very different than material from Earth. This difference was not in the elements, but something to do with the ions. But my simple way of understanding this is that I expect he will pop one of those particles in that expensive machine and find out it is the same stuff we find on Earth. Olivine, most common mineral in Earth's crust. And that's what they found. And this will be very shocking and unexpected. These are words I hear often from NASA researchers. So, what did they say? So, evolutionary origin is falsified. A high school science teacher and hydroplate theory student was right. The reason she was able to be there is she is a NASA ambassador. She is so respected as a school teacher, a science teacher and school teacher, that they let her be there to help educate everybody on the proof of the Big Bang is what she was there for. And she secretly knows, I know that's not how they got there. I know Dr. Brown's right. She's in the room while they're finding all this. Oh, shocked, we can't believe it. Look at what we're finding. She's right, and the UW astronomy professor is wrong, and still is. I had a discussion with Dr. Brownlee after press release that they found glycine. On August 18th, I called him. They found glycine, a left-handed amino acid, on the Build 2 comet. I said that everything that he, Brownlee, and other comet scientists are finding are perfectly consistent with the idea that comets formed as a result of debris that was ejected from the Earth. He did not balk at this statement and instead let me continue. He didn't say, how did you get my number? You're a nutcase, hang out. And actually, I had already talked to him before. I had given him, I get into a longer version of this last February. But so he knew me, he took the call, we had this, he didn't say, Kevin, you are absolutely out of your mind, I don't want to waste time. He just let me keep talking. The conversation was about 10 minutes long. He listened, discussed with professional respect. At the end of the discussion, he asked me to again tell him what Dr. Brown's website address was. He knows he's in so much trouble with being able to explain all this stuff that he's open to at least reading. And what I told him is, I go, Dr. Brownlee, you at least should read it, because I gave him the Comet chapter. And he told me he wasn't going to read it because he started to read it, and he knew that's not how comets and asteroids, so he put it down. And I said, you should at least read it, even if it's under your bed sheets at night. That's what I told him. Professionally, don't tell anybody about it, but under your bed sheets where nobody can tell, read it, because you got a problem, and Dr. Brown answers the problems. Not part of the original creation. Evidence supports that TNOs came from the Earth. Evolutionists admit evidence does not support their theories, and evolutionists wanted to read the hydroplate theory after being at a loss to explain what they found on Comet Build 2. And the reason I said that to the ICR scientists is, look, you guys, you vilify, you mock, you say nobody believes in Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory, you won't let anybody even mention it, you don't even honestly critique it. And this professor of evolutionary thought at the University of Washington gave more respect than I've ever seen in the creation. I didn't say this part to them, but he gave me more respect than the creationists that I've tried to talk to. And now we're getting to the end. Are we good? So then, in June 22, 2016, now we sent another space probe out to Comet 67P, 14 different organic compounds, dinosaur eggs up to 3 meters, rounded off rocks, thousands of them in a crater wall. And they're finding all this stuff out. I know Dr. Brownlee's hearing all this too, and he's already read the hydroplate theory, I'm thinking. And so I sent him another email because they're also, they're worried more and more and more about an asteroid hitting the Earth. And so I wrote him, this is just a portion of what I wrote him in an email that he never answered. where I said that any plan to deflect an asteroid will have to be based on assumptions about the composition of the asteroid. The physics behind the chosen plan may work for one composition, solid rock, but fail if the asteroid consists of a loosely held together rock pile. With data continuing to support that Dr. Brown may be right, and with the importance of knowing what comets and asteroids are made of, should one be out there with our name on it, wouldn't it be worth it to get together for an hour or two to discuss, just in case, off the record and with any other stipulations you would like to make? Because he lives over in Seattle area. And he never responded. Right about the time I'm writing this, unknown to me, they authorize the expenditures to put together this DART mission, NASA's Double Asteroid Redirection Test, to deflect an asteroid. And I don't even know, he might have thought, he must have heard about this planning. They're just giving the funding for this. And what the plan is there's a binary asteroid out there where the mother asteroid, the bigger asteroid, name is Didymus, and it has a moon that goes around it, a binary asteroid, Dimorphos. Again, shocking. How did that happen? How does one asteroid have a moon around it? They can't explain it, how that would form in space. But what they want to do is they can tell the orbital period of the moon, Dimorphos, because when they look at the asteroid, its light emitted goes down when the moon goes behind it, because now they're not seeing the light off of the moon. And so, okay, it takes that long. So then they send the space probe up there, and they're going to smack into the moon, and they'll be able to see if the orbit changed, and then that will tell them how much mass hitting that thing moved it that much. So if we see an asteroid with our name on it, it's coming towards us, and they go, it's going to smack us. So if we can get something there quick enough and smack it in a position that would cause the orbit to change ever so slightly, then it would miss us. That's the whole idea of the DART mission. And so it was launched on November 24th, 2021. It smacked into the asteroid on the 26th of September last year. I watched the live presentation from NASA for an hour and a half. While it was getting ready, we're going to see just a couple minutes of it here in a minute. And it was a successful mission. This was an animation they made before it hit. This is what they said was going to happen. 14,000 miles an hour. This sucker is smacking into the asteroid. Now, notice what they think is going to happen. Whoop, there's just a little puff. You know, it's a rock, and it's just going to hit that, and there's going to be a little bit of debris that swings up. So this is Dimorphos and how it's going to hit it. And see, the satellite pops out this little cube satellite, this Lycia cube, and it's going to watch the impact to see what happens. And the Italians in 2024 are going to launch a satellite to go see what it actually did. And and I'll be showing you a little bit more. But see how it changed the orbit? See the new orbit? There, the blue, the new orbit. And they were expecting it to just change a little bit. It changed it over 30 minutes. They were shocked. And I have a email via D. McClellan. I didn't tell the ICR people this because I hadn't actually written it yet. But we have an email ginned up for Dr. Brownlee, University of Washington, saying, hey, how come it was so much more than what you were thinking? And to me, from an orbital physics standpoint, it has to be that they thought the density was that of a solid rock, and they hit something that was very loosely held together with a lot of water, and it's not going to have the same density. And if you hit something that's lighter than you thought, it's going to affect it more. So everybody follow that, I hope so, but we haven't gotten an answer yet. I'm not even sure whether D has sent that, and I got to find out. So then this is what actually happened. This is the camera on that satellite as it is going to crash into the asteroid. How many people saw this when it happened? Okay, only one hand, a couple of hands. Okay, this is what happens.
continent on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now listen.
All right. 2 minutes out. Does not look like one single rock to me.
Oh, boy, we're getting close.
Doesn't sound like one
14,000
single rock. It doesn't look like one
miles
single
per
rock
hour
to me.
14,000 miles per
passing
hour.
the
and
bigger
remember,
asteroid,
you
which
know,
is Didymus. And so
45
they're
minutes
wanting
ago,
to miss this
55 minutes
close
ago,
one
we
and
couldn't
head to the
even
moon, which is
resolve
off
this-
to the right.
This object in space, and now we are, you can see us zeroing in right on target.
And we're now dropping the clock, and we'll go by loss of signal to confirm impact.
Right. Yes. Imagine we'll get that loss of signal, and then we'll hear from Lena Adams again, letting us know
I
that
feel
we've
like
been
we'll know. I feel
successful.
like that'll be a crystal clear signal.
I think so. I think we're starting to see more resolution. In fact, look at that. Didymos has even gone out of the view. We're now just seeing Dimorphos.
This is remarkable stuff.
And
Oh my goodness, look at that.
you can already
Tech
see
control
the
system
rock
settling
pile.
down. Angular rates look really good. I think we're going to get the investigation team some good pictures.
Wow.
No, come on, we can do better than that.
Starting to see those individual boulders there. You can see shadows of
Almost
various
30
rocks on the
seconds till
surface.
impact. It's amazing, guys. Oh my goodness, look at that. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Looks to me like we're headed straight in.
Your tax money at work
Oh,
here.
wow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. 8,
Yeah.
7,
Oh,
6,
wow.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, wow.
We're getting visual
Okay,
confirmation.
now look at that. What does that look like? That's a rock pile. And not only a rock pile, but you can see some of it's just dust and dirt. It looks like if you were to take this picture and show it to somebody, okay, what, dried riverbed, what do you got there? And I want you to understand that this is all it's loose stuff. How could that have ever formed in space? It couldn't have formed in space except by the processes that we discussed. It gets jettisoned from something in one direction. All of this debris is going in one direction, and it gravitationally attracts to itself through the moisture that's there to slow down the relative motion, and it comes very lightly together. And then it gets just a little bit more here.
Visual confirmation.
And there are rounded off parts to these rocks.
We got it?
Some's jagged, but some's rounded.
And we have impact.
Then that's it. It's smacked, okay? And then, we're close to the end. I wrote this email right after I saw that. Once I knew it directly hit in the center, I decided to go on record as an HPT, advocate about what are they going to find. Because they said we're going to have land-based telescopes looking at it. And again, that other satellite that went along and took a picture of it while it was going by, the impact, what are they going to find? So it was going to be the next day. So this is right after, the day after it collided. I said, hi all. Since DART confirmed what all HPT advocates suspected would be the case, that Dimorphos was a rock pile, I thought I should take a stab at predicting what the IKEA Cube cameras will show when the pictures are released. My guess, the impact of DART is similar to that of a cue ball hitting pool balls on the break, except that instead of the cue ball hitting 15 balls in the plane that are arranged in the shape of a triangle, DART is hitting millions of rocks of various sizes and shapes and dust throughout, all combined into a somewhat spherical shape. Now, what they thought they were going to do is hit the cue ball into racked balls. Have you ever tried to just hit the rack? You move it a half an inch, but it moves together. But if you take the rack off and you hit it, the balls go everywhere. As such, one would expect that the energy of the DART impactor, which is about 2.7 tons of TNT, will cause this energy to travel in thousands of ways through Dimorphos, transferring energy from the impact site to the rocks in the immediate area, which then transfers some of the energy to the rock next to them, and then to the rock next to those, etc., until the energy of each of the thousands of directions has created enough acceleration of mass to bring all the motion to a stop in that direction. Hopefully, that's not too much of physics there, but that's what would happen. You know, you smack it and you're sending the energy through all the different places until you've accelerated mass equal to that energy expenditure of that impact. I would suspect that this would result in Dimorphos having some of its surface rocks at places all around the sphere of Dimorphos being accelerated away from the surface, some with enough energy to escape Dimorphos. In other words, as that energy goes through rock to rock to rock to rock, when it gets to the last rock that's on the surface, what's going to happen? Bam! It's just going to shoot that rock out. And it doesn't take much for it. You know, Brian Nickel calculated for me based on whatever mass he used for Dimorphos that just 4 inches a second would be enough to cause it to leave Dimorphos. And so think of this, you know, so if you move that last rock this fast, it's going to leave Dimorphos because it's just such a low gravitational body. Therefore, any rock on the surface that receives enough energy to go 4 inches a second in a direction other than the main asteroid body of Didymus, you know, if the rock heads towards Didymus, it's going to crash into Didymus. But anything that's not going towards Didymus is gone. It's going to go into its own orbit around the sun. They'll go into their own orbits around the sun. As such, Dimorphos will lose some of its mass, and they're now saying in an article I read a couple days ago, tons. It lost tons of mass. And quite possibly, despite NASA's promises that the DART mission would not create a hazard to our planet, put some of the ejected rock into orbital paths that will someday impact Earth. If so, I suspect they will call the swarm the DART meteor shower. So they probably, hey, there's no way this thing can impact us. We're only going to slow it down. It's too far away from us. There's no way. But if you just caused it to spit its mass out into the solar system, going into orbits around the sun, it's very possible that some of that stuff is going to come back to Earth. I would also expect that, not back to Earth, well, yeah, back to Earth. I would also expect that some of the impact site rock will be pulverized into powder ejected, as some would expect from a 2.7 ton TNT impact. This pulverized rock will be ejected in an expected cone shape with velocities that will also put the debris in their own orbits around the sun. I would suspect that the Earth-based telescopes will see a larger light reflection from Dimorphos at first, as the escaping rocks reflect light back to Earth's observers. According to the article below, they will not be releasing the pictures of the impact until tomorrow. This is my best guess ahead of time, and I may be wrong about the above, and time will soon tell, but one thing is for sure, the DART mission planners thought they would be hitting a solid asteroid, which was based on the Big Bang paradigm of how asteroids are formed. And that's why she said at the very beginning, man, doesn't look like a solid rock to me. That's what they saw. That's what the little cube satellite saw when it hit. Massive increase of light. And this is what the Earth-based telescope saw. And see the debris leaving it to the left? And so it hit head on, and this kind of leaves you with a wrong impression, because it's hitting from the right and ejecting all that stuff to the left, but it's just the way they're watching it, you know, its motion through the other stars around there that gives that illusion. But look at that debris field that went out.
So the satellite stayed intact?
Oh no, the satellite obliterated itself. It was going 14,000 miles a second. 14,000 miles an hour, I'm sorry. 14,000 miles an hour. I mean, it just totally obliterated itself. But what I'm saying is it hit that rock pile, and just like I said, it just all that energy, and it caused a bunch of debris to be ejected from that asteroid moon, Dimorphos.
All those bright spots are ejected?
No, the bright spots are other stars in the sky. So once again, let me back it up again. So let's watch this again. This right here, can you see that? That is Dimorphos, okay? And you can't see the satellite hitting it. But the satellite's coming from here, bam, and ejecting it in this direction. Does everybody see that?
Is reflecting the light. That's what looks like that aura is actually reflection from the debris.
Yeah, all this right here is debris that is forever leaving Dimorphos and going into its own orbit around the sun.
Just like you get the pool balls.
Yep. Yep. Okay, and
most of it stayed intact.
most of it, yeah. And from the energy, you would think that. You would think the amount. This thing, if you put Dimorphos, it would fit into a football stadium. That's how big it was. Sit down in the field, not the whole stadium, but down in the field it would sit in there. And then this is a picture. They did not expect this, and I kicked myself for not predicting it, that it would actually look like a comet for a while. So it then left a comet tail. The solar winds were blowing out a comet tail from all the debris that was forever leaving Dimorphos. And you know what? That picture was taken by Robert Lee. And you know what? My dad was Robert Lee, a rocket scientist, but no relation. Have no idea who that guy is. So, what non-HPT creationists say, they were part of six-day creation, not consistent with Scripture. What the evolutionists speculate, to their own admission, not supported by the evidence. The hydroplate theory explanation, were a consequence of the flood. And the evidence supports it. All the evidence from Stardust and other space probes is consistent with Dr. Brown's premise of asteroids, TNOs forming inside of our solar system when debris and water was ejected from the Earth during the flood. All the evidence. When I told Dr. Brownlee everything that we know, and I went on to say, I know what makes it so difficult is because you think, how could the Earth have ejected this debris? And I said, that's a good thing to hinder. But Dr. Brown has the answer for that. And if you just accept that, everything that we know is that they came from the Earth. And he wanted to read the chapter. This is 67P. See that this picture on the left, this guy right here on the left, somehow a meteor or another thing collided with this 67P comet, which is very small density. In other words, it looks big, but it's not very much density because it's mostly made up of empty space and ice and stuff. But it punched a hole into it, and I know you can't see it, but this wall right here is thousands and thousands of rounded off rocks. And they called them, the scientists call them when they have the better resolution with what they publish, dinosaur eggs. They actually call them dinosaur eggs. And they found 16 complex organic molecules, all this other stuff. It is a contact binary comet. See that? That left body, they said it looks like a duck. They call it a duck. The duck body's on the left. It was a separate orbiting body before it connected at the neck with the one that's on the right. A contact binary cannot explain how that could happen in space. Hydroplate theory can, so we say Walt Brown was here.
Have you showed that today?
Yeah, I showed that, and they laughed at that. Yeah, they gave a little chuckle. Walt Brown was here. Dr. Randy Galusa. He thought that was pretty cool. Comets, asteroids were not part of God's good creation, but they are here now, have impacted the Earth before, and according to the Bible prophecy, are going to impact the Earth again. Those who reject biblical creation in the flood manufacture fairy tales in an attempt to explain objects in our solar system. But the biblical Christian can have an answer that is consistent with the Bible and science, and use that knowledge to reject the deceptions and be a witness to others, even Dr. Brownlee, if they use HPT. And we do have an email planned for Dr. Brownlee. I am expecting him to answer someday. D. McClellan says Dr. Brownlee is an honest scientist. If he truly grasps that this is just overwhelming evidence, she thinks he would shift. And so for this, they willfully forget. This is 2 Peter chapter 3, which we just covered last week in our Wednesday night study. that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water, and in the water that was underneath the crust, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with that water, flooded with water. Even Peter, it goes along with the fact there was an ocean under the crust that is what caused the flood. But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire. Now think about this. When an asteroid hits with that kind of energy, and we have magma from the compression event that's down underneath the crust, and we start breaking up the crust and stuff, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, one of these asteroids could hit and cause a runaway earthquake, global earthquake, fires from volcanoes and everything else that are coming. And so the debris from the flood is going to come back to Earth and cause the judgment by fire in the tribulation period. But why is God waiting? Don't forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Special thanks to my beautiful wife who was there, and Anne, who was a hydroplate theory widow over the years. This has been a passion of mine for 2 decades. And a lot of work went into learning about this. Brian Nickel, his wife is an HPT widow at times too, spent hundreds and hundreds of hours. Mike Snavely, the flood animation, and for Dee McClellan, who I stay in touch with, and we're working together. And she was there. She was an eyewitness to some of the stuff that's presented here of what was happening, and resources, again, as we covered in the beginning. So, any questions?
Can I make one very
Yes.
quick comment? Just because I think it's important to clarify. Your explanation covers this, but at times, for shortcut, you make the statement that comets, asteroids, and TNOs came from the Earth.
Yep.
It's not like those comets and asteroids and TNOs erupted from the Earth. They were formed afterwards.
Very, very important. Yeah, let me make this point. You're right. And next week we're going to cover this with Brian Nichols. I used to have it part of this presentation, before ICR, but then I knew we were going to go into Brian Nichols' videos, which explain this. It's not like the Earth burped out a comet. It's not like Comet 67P left Earth as the Comet 67P. It ejected material that once it got away from Earth's gravity, all that debris came together to be all the comets, all the asteroids, and then they individually are spinning out. We're going to explain this more next week, and I'll bring my radiometer here and demonstrate it. It then spun out. So don't be thinking it just shot out an asteroid. It shot out debris that became an asteroid. Very, very good point if I didn't make that clear. Oh, there's tens of thousands of Trans-Neptunian objects of various different sizes, and some people blow it off. Some people respond and think, you guys are crazy. If all of the asteroids and all of the TNOs came from Earth, that's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but the Earth was a lot more mass, not a lot more, I think it was 3%. Somebody calculated if all the TNOs and all the comets, asteroids, debris came from Earth, that I think the number is 3% of the mass of the Earth was ejected into space. And that's not, if you can just accept the amount of energy that is released. Remember, how many were around when Mount St. Helens blew? Okay? 1,200 feet of the top of that mountain got pulverized into dust and went all over the world. And that's just one little stinky mountain. We're talking about the instant that crack ruptures and both the walls of each side of that crust is sloughing off, and the bottom of the crust that has been, weakened by the supercritical water, dissolving the minerals and stuff, and all of that stuff is shooting out, covering the Earth with a mile-thick sediment, and then sending stuff into space with energy. Mount St. Helens was a nothing. This is 46,000 mile crack, the scar of the mid-oceanic ridge is how we know it's 46,000 miles. It's sending millions, billions of pounds of debris up into space, some of it landing on the Earth to be sedimentary rock. Yeah, Carol.
Okay. Just trying to understand this, and maybe this is a stupid question, but the presentation said that the water was completely underneath the crust.
Yep.
Around the entire surface.
Yep.
Okay. And what I'm hearing you say is there was one fissure that opened up, and all of this kind of drained out of that one. Wouldn't there have been enough pressure in other places to open up other cracks?
Okay, good question. So the question is that there was all one ocean underneath, and so then there was this one crack. So is there going to be another crack someplace else? So the pressure is building up inside. And by the way, the crust wasn't just floating on nothing but a pool of water. The Bible says that the earth is founded on pillars. This is going to be clear next week when you see Brian Nichols, that the crust would have had pillars that were attaching into the mantle. So if you were down in the subterranean chamber, you'd see this pillar's coming down, this pillar's coming down, and in between is water everywhere inside the chamber. Does everybody get that visual picture in your head? And that attaches the crust to the spinning mantle, the spinning earth. So the earth is all spinning together. And that's what caused the dry land to appear. Remember, the flood of Noah was the second flood that the earth experienced. The first flood was at creation. Remember when the Spirit of God hovered over the waters? The earth was completely flooded. And then it says, God said, let the dry land appear. And so the dry land appear as the crust. This is the hydroplate theory understanding. The crust then went bowed down here, bowed down here, bowed down here, creating pre-flood lakes and ponds, oceans, that the water ran off to as the land lifted up. So as one place went down, the water pushed up another place. So you have pre-flood mountains that are not that high. And then you have pre-flood seas that are not that deep. But the dry land appeared. And so then when the flood occurred, the pillars are breaking and the crust becomes even flatter than it was before the rupture. So now here's the deal is what you're asking is demonstrated this way. I'm putting a stress on this piece of paper. And so what happens is when I stress it, ultimately I'm going to reach the point, and it doesn't break over here. It doesn't cause another crack over here. Wherever the crack starts from, it then propagates from that crack. And then what it does is it keeps on wrapping itself around the earth, and Brian Nichols does a perfect job of explaining that crack's going to keep on going until it runs into a stop, which is basically broken open the earth with a 46,000 mile crack that's going around where the mid-oceanic ridge is. And you can tell even where one crack got ahead of another crack, and when the crack runs into it, it stops. You see that every time you break your windshield. See, when your windshield fractures, it doesn't start a fracture over here after it's fractured here. It's that it spiders and goes until it runs into something that stops it. So, does that help? Brian Nichols' video will help even more next week. Yeah, Dustin.
Two questions. Do we have the average size of a cat on all the tens of thousands?
Yeah, it said in the first slide.
TNOs are three different things.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. You said TNOs. Did you mean TNOs?
I say all of them.
Oh, do they know the average size of all of them? No, we don't even know where all of them are.
Well, the ones we do know.
The ones we do know, I would imagine the people that have, okay, here's the comets, here's the asteroids, here's this, here's that. What's the, then they would come up with the, what do you mean? Do you mean the average size, or do you mean if you put it all together into one place?
The average size of each of these.
No, I'm sure they have that, but I don't have it. So let's close in prayer, and then we'll wait for next week for part 2. Father, we thank you for this time. We pray that by the power of your Spirit, Lord, you would just help us to appreciate what this really means, to As I closed out with ICR, your psalm, that when I consider the heavens and the work of your hands, we stand in awe, God, that you even care about us, that you care about human beings, because your glories and your majesty and just the things that have happened are just beyond comprehension. And Lord, we're thankful that you've saved us from the judgment to come by the judgment that your Son took upon himself on the cross. And we just really pray that you would help us to help others who are not yet believing to turn away from their sins so that they too could have everlasting life and escape the judgment that's coming. In Jesus' name, amen.
Ooh, you're glorious, yeah. Is your name